All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really powerful classic story to uncover a totally fascinating sociological concept, the deep irony of charity and poverty. We're going to be stepping into a narrative that's set against a relentless, incredibly destructive storm. But, this isn't just about surviving some bad weather. It's actually a profound look into human nature itself, exploring why the people who have the absolute least are so often the ones willing to give the most.
So, when you've literally lost everything, what exactly is left to give? It's a question that kind of just upends everything we think we know about wealth and charity. Usually, we think of generosity as this luxury of the rich, right? Something you do when you've got a nice little surplus. But what happens when you have a massive deficit? How does a guy facing absolute physical and financial ruin suddenly become this beacon of hospitality? Keep that question in the back of your mind, because the answer is the absolute heart of the irony we're analyzing today.
Okay, moving to Section 1, the burden of poverty. Our story centers on Dhiru and his wife Kajri. They're an orphaned, highly marginalized couple facing this week-long, truly existential rainstorm. And just look at how fast things spiral into a perfect storm of misery here. On day 1, the relentless rain traps them. Then by day 2, a leak in their roof completely wipes out their meager life savings. The paper money gets completely soaked and torn, rendering it totally worthless. Driven by pure desperation on day 3, Dhiru braves the storm to work at a grain godown, but he's so exhausted he makes a tragic mistake. He accidentally drops a sack of grain into the floodwaters, totally spoiling it. And bam, that instantly drops him into day 4, a state of crushing, inescapable debt. He's gone from just being poor to being completely ruined.
Now for Section 2, cruelty of the wealthy.
To really grasp the true magnitude of Dhiru's generosity later on, we first have to look at his employer, this incredibly wealthy but absolutely merciless landowner, Thakur Durjan Pratap. The Thakur is completely insulated from the storm, safely tucked away, yet he is completely morally bankrupt. When Dhiru accidentally drops that single sack of grain, he begs for forgiveness, explaining his totally desperate situation. And the Thakur's response? He greedily demands triple the repayment. You will pay 3 sacks for 1. And then he violently kicks Dhiru out into the freezing rain, forbidding him from coming back until this impossible debt is paid. The Thakur's wealth has literally insulated him from any shred of human compassion.
Which brings us to Section 3, the irony of generosity.
So, picture this. Vieiro is walking home. He's completely destitute, hopelessly in debt, and starving. But on his way, he spots 2 stranded strangers, Raman and Junkie, just huddled under a tree, desperate for shelter from this deadly storm. They have nowhere to go, and the other villagers have just completely ignored them. Here is a man whose own life is literally collapsing around him. What does he do? Well, in stark contrast to the wealthy Thakur's greed, Dhiru says these incredibly powerful words: humanity is still a thing. He takes them right into his own leaking home. And his wife Kajri? She doesn't complain about the extra mouths to feed. Instead, she joyfully cooks them an absolute feast with whatever tiny rations they have left. They push aside their own crushing anxiety and hunger just to make these strangers feel like honored guests.
Let's pause for a second, because this right here is the core of our explainer. This is the irony of generosity. Dhiru's lifelong experience of being mocked, shunned as an orphan, and just totally ground down by poverty. It didn't make him bitter. Actually, it made him hyper-empathetic, because he knows exactly what it feels like to be abandoned in a storm. He is psychologically incapable of leaving someone else in that exact same position. His shared suffering is essentially a bridge, driving him to give when, mathematically speaking, he has absolutely nothing left to offer.
All right, let's dive into Section 4, True Wealth Unveiled.
The very next morning, the narrative does a complete 180. Raman and Janki reveal they aren't poor travelers at all. No way! Raman is actually a vastly wealthy city merchant, and he instantly steps up and erases Dhiru's massive debt to the Thakur. But this really forces us to look at what true wealth actually means here. On the left side, we have the Thakur, massive material wealth but fundamentally isolated and cruel. On the right, Dhiru, absolutely penniless, yet overflowing with emotional wealth and deep human connection. And Raman the merchant, he realizes that despite his heavy purse, he'd actually been living a lot more like the Thakur, totally isolated and alone.
So you might be wondering, why the whole secret identity act? Why did Raman hide who he was? Well, because immense material wealth often breeds deep isolation and distrust.
He was absolutely terrified that if Dhiru and Kajri knew he was rich right away, their kindness would just become transactional. He wanted to be valued for his humanity, not his bank account. By staying silent, Raman proved to himself beyond a shadow of a doubt that Dhiru's incredible generosity was 100% genuine. It was born of pure empathy, not some calculated greed.
And finally, Section 5, the karmic reward. Empowered by Raman's financial backing, Dhiru confidently marches back, throws that money right in the greedy Fakur's face, and never looks back. The heavy burden is finally lifted. But the ultimate karmic reward happens just as they're preparing to leave. As a parting token, Kajri gifts Dhiru a brand new kurta for his journey, since Raman has actually offered Dhiru a partnership in his city business. As Dhiru takes off his old, torn shirt to change, he exposes this unique, lifelong birthmark right on the back of his neck, a mark he has had since he was a tiny baby.
Boom. Here is where the emotional climax hits. Raman's eyes lock onto that familiar mark. Instantly, all these memories flood back of his mother talking about a brother who was lost when they were just infants. Then comes the staggering, mind-blowing realization. These two orphaned men, who felt this instant magnetic bond in the storm, are actually blood relatives. That deep human connection wasn't just random kindness, it was literally blood calling out to blood.
0. Absolutely 0. That is the exact number of times the villagers showed Dhiru any compassion, respect, or help when he was struggling in poverty. They mocked him, they called him cursed, and they were perfectly fine leaving him to drown in his debts. Yet, the literal second he gains a wealthy brother, moves to the city, and eventually becomes even richer than the Thakur himself, suddenly the villagers are showering him with endless respect and praise. It's a pretty stark, biting commentary on how society frequently values a person's net worth entirely over their actual character.
As we wrap up this explainer, I really want you to take a hard look at this final question. The irony of generosity shows us that the deepest empathy is so often forged right in the fires of hardship. Remember, the terrifying storm that nearly destroyed Dhiru's life, that was the exact same storm that delivered his absolute greatest treasure, a long-lost brother and a totally renewed faith in humanity. So ask yourself, are we measuring our true wealth by the resources we hoard or by the compassion we are willing to give away when the storm hits? Thanks so much for joining me to explore this incredible concept and keep looking for the deeper meaning behind the stories around you.